My own son rejected me for being disabled. The revenge I took made him homeless. The spoon hits the tile floor with a clatter that echoes louder than it should. I'm still on my knees, one hand gripping the counter, the other trembling with effort. My back has gone stiff. Again, I try to pull myself up, but the pain shoots down my hip like a punishment. And I know I won't be getting up without help. There was a time when I could clean a whole house before noon and still bake an apple pie before dinner. Now, I can't even stand up in my own kitchen. My name is Irene. I'm 67 years old, and I live or used to live in a small town in Indiana, where the winters are unforgiving and the people pride themselves on being tougher than the wind. I was one of them once, a wife, a mother, a volunteer at the church. Then, my leg stopped cooperating, and the cane I swore I'd never use became a permanent extension of me. When the fall happened, it wasn't just my body that hit the ground. Something else cracked too, something you don't hear but feel, like a thread that snaps deep inside. I managed to crawl to the couch that afternoon. I lay there for 3 hours until my son, my only child, finally came home. He opened the door, saw me still in my robe, and frowned. Not concern, just disappointment. "You fall again?" he asked, tossing his jacket on the banister. I nodded. He didn't offer a hand. He walked past me and turned on the TV. That's when I knew something had shifted in the air between us. It used to be full of warmth and obligation, the kind only a child can have for a parent. But now it was colder, like a draft slipping through a crack in the wall. He used to call me Mama. Now it was just Mom, short, clipped, like I was a task, not a person. After my husband died, my son asked me to come live with him for a while. I thought it would be temporary, too. I brought only a suitcase and my late husband's watch. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've learned that in some households, the walls have ears. And in my son's house, the ears whispered resentments. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room that had slowly become more of a storage closet. Boxes lined the floor now. My walker barely fit between the door and the edge of the bed. I stared at the ceiling and asked myself, is this how it ends? Forgotten in a house that doesn't want you waiting for someone to change your sheets. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet, but something inside me knew I was no longer seen as a person. I was a burden, and once someone decides you're a burden, kindness becomes charity, patience becomes pity, and love becomes conditional. If you were in my shoes, what would you do when your own child begins to treat you like dead weight? You're too much work, Mom. The next morning, my son didn't ask how I slept. He didn't ask if I needed help getting dressed or if the pain had eased. He just walked past the guest room with his coffee muttering into his Bluetooth headset, already deep in some conference call. I sat on the bed in my flannel pajamas, my legs stiff, my fingers fumbling with the zipper of my robe. His wife, my daughter-in-law, appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. No good morning, no smile, just the usual sideways glance that made my insides crawl. "You left the kettle on again," she said, arms folded. "I turned it off. I remember," I said quietly. "Well, it was hissing when I came down." She turned and walked away, her slippers whispering over the hardwood floor. They always made it sound like I was one misstep away from burning the house down. But the truth was, they had already started burning the bridge between us piece by piece. Later that week, I overheard them in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, moving slower than usual, when I heard my son's voice, low and agitated. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "She needs too much. It's like having a third kid. She's too much work, my daughter-in-law added, biting the words like they tasted bad. And she's always around. We have no space. I stood there in my robe, the hallway, cold against my ankles, heart pounding like a drum that had lost its rhythm. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a project, a burden, a complication. I didn't cry. Not then. I just backed into the guest room like a shadow slipping out of place. A few days later, they sat me down. My son held his phone scrolling like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "We've been talking," he began, not meeting my eyes. "That's never a good start. And we need to figure something out," my daughter-in-law said, trying to soften her voice, but not enough. "This setup isn't working anymore." I looked at them, my only son, and the woman he chose, and I felt the floor vanish from beneath me. "We think you'd be more comfortable in assisted living," he added. Comfortable? That word again, used like a pillow to smother the truth. I stared at my son, the same one who used to sleep in my bed after nightmares, who once broke his arm on the monkey bars and screamed for me, who used to draw me pictures that said, "Best mom ever" in backward letters. And now he wanted me out. Not even a discussion, not a plan, just a notice. "We're not kicking you out," he added. "We'll help with the paperwork." I said nothing. I simply nodded and folded my hands in my lap. They didn't see how tightly I gripped my fingers. That night I stared at the ceiling again. Only this time I didn't wonder if this was how it ends. I started to wonder if I was the one who had to decide how it ends. Because love isn't supposed to feel like eviction. If your child looked you in the eye and said you were too much work, would you stay quiet? Or would something inside you wake up the day he locked the fridge? The final straw didn't come with a scream. It came with a click. I had just returned from my daily shuffle down the driveway with my walker, something I did every morning just to remind myself I could still move. I wasn't even wearing shoes, just thick socks and the slippers my sister sent me last Christmas. I came in chilled from the early Indiana wind and went straight to the kitchen to get a cup of yogurt. Something soft, something small. That's when I saw it. A plastic latch, white, clamped around both handles of the refrigerator. Child-proof. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Something left over from when my grandson was little. But no, this was new. Installed. Tight. With a padlock. I stared at it, my hand resting on the cold metal door. Then I turned slowly and saw the note on the counter in my son's handwriting. "Please ask before taking anything. We're trying to be mindful about groceries. Thanks." Thanks. Not even love your son. Just thanks. I waited on the kitchen stool until he got home. He tossed his keys into the bowl like he always did. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the note. He sighed, pulled his coat off, and said, "Mom, groceries are expensive. You leave things open. You forget what you've eaten. We need to keep better track. So you locked me out of the fridge. It's not just you. We're locking it for everyone." That was a lie. No one else needed a key but me. I didn't say another word. I just went back to my room, the guest room, as they started calling it again. There, I sat on the edge of the bed and remembered the time he got food poisoning at summer camp. He cried into the phone until I picked him up. Drove 5 hours, brought him his favorite soup. He threw up in my lap. I didn't even flinch. And now he couldn't bear the thought of me having a yogurt without permission. A few days later, I tried again. This time, I waited until everyone was out and used a butter knife to pry the latch. I wasn't even hungry. I just wanted to prove to myself that I still could. I stood there, staring into the cold glow of the open fridge, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't belong in that house anymore. It wasn't about food. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. He didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a risk, a liability. Later that night, my grandson came into the room while I was folding towels. He looked at me with his wide eyes and asked, "Why do they lock you out, Grandma?" I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people we raise forget what it means to love without limits? How do you explain what it's like to be a ghost in a house where you used to matter? That night, I started making a list, not of groceries, not of chores, a list of everything I had quietly given up: my independence, my home, my voice, my respect. And I promised myself that list wouldn't grow any longer. If your own child started treating you like a stranger, would you keep shrinking yourself to fit their life, or would you find a way to grow again? The nurse, with the pity eyes, she arrived on a Thursday morning, her car crunching across the gravel like it was stepping on eggshells. I watched her from the window, thin woman, mid-30s hair, pulled back clipboard in hand. Her badge said Home Health Services. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one had told me a nurse was coming. She stepped into the living room with a careful smile, like someone entering a room full of broken glass. "Hi, Irene," she said gently. "I'm Marissa. Your son arranged for me to come check in on you, just a weekly wellness visit." I forced a smile. Wellness, I repeated as if the word might dissolve on my tongue. Marissa was kind. I'll give her that. She asked the right questions, took my blood pressure, checked the swelling in my legs, made notes that didn't feel judgmental. But then she hesitated. She looked around the room, the boxes stacked in the corner, the dusty window pane, my walker leaning like a sad skeleton in the corner. And then her eyes did it. That thing, that softening, that drop in the corners. Pity. I've seen it 100 times before. In churches, grocery stores, even family reunions. It's the expression people use when they want to feel like they care, but not enough to do anything. She was trying not to show it, but I saw it. What I asked. She glanced at her clipboard. "Nothing. Your son mentioned he's looking into an assisted living facility. Maybe something with full-time care." I felt the air leave the room. He said that. She nodded slowly. He said he's overwhelmed, that this situation isn't sustainable. I didn't even remember the rest of her visit. I just sat in that armchair, staring at the floor, while her polite questions turned into white noise. When she finally left, I stayed frozen for nearly an hour, overwhelmed. I raised him alone after his father passed, worked 2 jobs, put off my own surgeries so I could help pay for his college, never once asked for anything in return, not a dime, not a day, not a thank you. And now I was too much. The following week she came again. Same questions, same clipboard, but something shifted in me. This time, when she asked how I was doing, I said lonely. When she asked if I felt safe, I said not really. When she asked if there was anything else, I looked her in the eye and said, "I think I'm invisible in this house." She paused, wrote that down, asked if I wanted to talk to someone. I said no, but thank you. And I meant it. I wasn't looking for sympathy anymore. I was gathering data, watching, waiting, preparing. You can't fight a war you haven't studied. After she left that day, I shuffled to the hallway where the thermostat used to be. My son had installed a smart system, one I didn't have access to anymore. They'd taken control of the heat, the groceries, the visitors, and now they wanted to take control of where I lived. But I still had control of one thing, my name, and everything that still belonged to it. That night, I pulled out an old folder from the bottom of my suitcase. It had my name on it, and my husband's, and something else they didn't know existed. If someone told you that your child had already planned to ship you out, without asking, what would you do with that information? Sit back and wait, or dig deep and reclaim the version of yourself they forgot ever existed. The fork dropped, a voice raised. It was a Sunday. The house smelled like overcooked pot roast and tension. They'd invited the neighbors over. Just a casual dinner, they said. But I knew better. It was a performance. The good son, the doting daughter-in-law, the sweet, quiet old mother, tucked in the corner like a doily on a shelf. I tried to look presentable. I wore the blue cardigan my sister had sent me the year my husband died. I brushed my hair back and put on a little lip color, even though my hands shook when I did it. I wanted to feel like someone. We sat at the long dining table, laughter echoing louder than it should have, in a house that rarely knew joy anymore. My grandson sat at the end legs, swinging under the table. I smiled at him. He smiled back. And then I dropped my fork. It slipped through my fingers like it had its own mind, clattered against the tile with a sound that seemed to freeze the room. My daughter-in-law's smile froze. My son looked up sharply. "Seriously," she said under her breath, but loud enough. I bent down to retrieve it, my knees aching as I moved slowly, shame curling in my stomach like acid. I felt my face flush as I struggled to come back upright. "Mom, you've got to be more careful," my son snapped. I looked up at him, his face, red jaw tight. "It's just a fork," I said quietly. He slammed his hand on the table. Everyone jumped. The neighbors' eyes widened. My grandson stopped chewing. "You always make a scene," he barked. "Always something." I froze, like prey. The room fell silent. No one said anything. No one defended me. I looked around and realized in that moment that this wasn't just a bad night. This was a turning point. Because that anger wasn't new. It had just found a crack to slip through. After the neighbors left, the silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was thick, like fog rolling in before a storm. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, the same way I had after the fall in the kitchen. Only this time, I didn't feel broken. I felt done. Done pretending, done tiptoeing, done swallowing my own dignity like a bitter pill. And something inside me, a quiet part that had slept too long, woke up. That part remembered the woman who once ran a PTA board with 3 broken fingers and a fever. That part remembered the woman who negotiated down a car salesman in front of 5 men who laughed in her face. That part remembered that I didn't raise my son to become this kind of man, but he had, and I had let him. If your own child raised his voice at you in front of others, if the people you fed, cleaned for, gave your life to acted like you were a stain on their dinner party, how much longer would you keep quiet? Would you still believe silence was the noble thing to do, or would you finally stand up, even if it meant standing alone? The shed out back. They didn't call it exile. They called it space. "We just want you to have your own privacy," my daughter-in-law said, her voice smooth as butter that's just started to turn. "That way, you're not always stuck in the guest room." She said it like it was a gift, like they were doing me a favor. But I knew what it was. I knew what the shed out back meant. The old tool shed, tucked behind the garage, was where we used to keep the lawnmower and gardening supplies. My husband had built it decades ago, back when we still believed this house would stay in the family forever. Back when our son was a little boy, with dirt under his fingernails and a habit of naming every worm he found. Now it had been cleared out, carpeted with a scratchy stained rug, and fitted with a single bed and a thin curtain over the one small window. They'd run an extension cord from the garage. There was a lamp, a fan, a cracked mini-fridge. "This way," my son said, guiding me toward it, like a hotel concierge showing off a suite. "You can come and go as you like. No stairs to worry about. No heat either," I said, stepping inside. The walls still smelled faintly of gasoline and mildew. "We'll get you a space heater," he said quickly. "It's just temporary." Temporary. The word hung in the air like smoke. The bed creaked when I sat. I counted the paces from one wall to the other, 9 steps, if I dragged my walker slowly 7, if I didn't. The bathroom. Still in the house. 40 feet and one patch of uneven gravel away. I stared at the corner where my husband's rake used to hang. They hadn't even patched the nail holes. There was a small folding table next to the bed. On it, they'd placed a plastic bin filled with granola bars, 2 bottles of water, and a roll of paper towels. It looked like a welcome basket for a prisoner. That night, the wind howled against the shed door like a warning. I lay under the thin blanket, clutching my sweater, closed, listening to the hum of the extension cord as the lamp flickered. The light inside was weak. The light inside me felt even weaker. And yet something stirred. It wasn't rage, not yet, but it was the first spark. Because when someone puts you out like garbage, they expect you to stay out, to rot. But I wasn't ready to rot, not yet. 2 nights later, I slipped on the gravel and nearly fell again. My son helped me up, but barely looked at me. He muttered, "You need to be more careful," like I had tripped on purpose. That night, as I sat shivering, I pulled out a notebook. On the first page I wrote, "He does not see me anymore, but I see him clearly now." And below that, "I am not dead yet. If someone you raised with every ounce of your love put you in a tool shed, like a problem they didn't want to look at, would you take that as your new home? Or would you start planning your escape, your return, your reckoning? One disability check too many." It was never about the money until it was. The day I heard them talk about my check, I was sitting in the shed with the door cracked open just enough to let the cold breeze in and the sound from the house out. The windows weren't double-paned, and the walls may as well have been made of paper. I'd left the shed door open that morning. Not by accident. I had started to learn how to use their comfort against them. They assumed I wasn't listening anymore, that my silence meant surrender. From the kitchen window, I heard my daughter-in-law first. Her voice was sharp, full of that mix of stress and control she liked to pass off as being organized. "She gets more than I thought," she said. "That disability deposit. Did you check the amount again?" My son responded, "Yeah, it hits on the 3rd, around 1,400. It's not nothing." My heart slowed. They were discussing it like it was their money, like it was a monthly stipend for housing a burden. "She doesn't even know what's in her account," she added. "You said she still signs the bills, right?" "She doesn't read them. She just signs." A beat of silence, then laughter. Quiet, but it felt loud in my chest. They were laughing at me. That money was for my care, my health, the things I could no longer do for myself. But in their hands, it had become something else, a side hustle. I felt sick. The next time my son handed me an envelope to sign, I stared at it longer than usual. It was a bill. House maintenance, he claimed. I signed it. But that night, I made a second note in my notebook. He is stealing from me. The next day, I checked the old flip phone I kept hidden in the back of my underwear drawer. The one I had kept after switching numbers. It still worked. I called the 800 number for my bank account. He was right. 1,400 every month, and withdrawals I didn't recognize big ones. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I asked to go to the post office. To mail a letter to my sister, I lied. My son barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, okay. I'll drop it off later." "No," I said. "I want to go myself." He sighed, annoyed, but agreed. We drove in silence. He parked in the fire lane and stayed in the car. I hobbled inside and mailed 2 things: a decoy letter to my sister and a real letter to my lawyer. I wrote it by hand the night before. It said simply, "Activate the plan." The one Arthur and I discussed before he passed. Tell no one. Arthur, my husband, had been practical to the bone. After his stroke, we created a trust, a separate account, untouchable without my signature. Something he had insisted on, just in case our boy ever forgets himself. I hated that he ever said it, but now I thanked him. I dropped the letter in the mailbox with a shaking hand and turned back toward the car. My son didn't look up from his phone as I climbed back in. "You okay?" he asked flatly. "Just tired," I said. But what I felt wasn't exhaustion. It was a turning of the tide. That night, I curled up on the cot in the shed and whispered out loud to no one but my dead husband, "I'm not done. You didn't raise me to go quietly." If your own child laughed at the money you rely on to survive if they stole it, while smiling to your face, how long would you wait before reclaiming what's yours? Would you forgive, or would you remember every unpaid debt, every cruel laugh, and finally decide it was time for them to learn the value of nothing, cranberry jam, and a quiet decision? The morning air was sharp, the kind that pinched your skin just enough to make you feel awake. I stood outside the shed in my cardigan and house slippers, a wooden spoon in one hand, and the kettle steaming on the old hot plate beside me. I was making cranberry jam. My hand shook a little now when I stirred, but that didn't stop me. The recipe was simple, my mother's, just berry sugar and the tiniest splash of orange zest. I made it every year for Thanksgiving, even when no one asked for it anymore. As the fruit bubbled and popped, I looked at the mason jars, lined up on the rickety table beside me. 5 of them, all washed, all waiting. I filled each one carefully, screwing on the lids with aching fingers. Then I wrapped them in brown paper, tied them with twine, and wrote names on the tags. One for the woman down the street, who always waved, even when I was limping. One for the mailman, who brought my prescriptions all the way to the shed door. One for the nurse Marissa. One for my sister, and one for the lawyer. Yes, I included one for him. I slipped his into the box, along with a second letter, more detailed this time. I wrote it with the kind of clarity that comes only when heartbreak turns cold and steady. I laid out what my son had done: the financial theft, the verbal abuse, the forced relocation to the shed, the medical neglect. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for closure. I asked for action. Proceed with the full transition of assets, I wrote. Freeze the joint access. Secure the property titles. Initiate the housing transfer. I signed it, folded it, and tucked it into the package like it was just another jar of preserves. At the post office, I smiled at the clerk and said, "These are gifts." He smiled back. "They're lucky to get something homemade." I wanted to laugh, if only he knew what was really cooking. That evening, my son came out to the shed. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me pour hot water into a chipped mug. "What's all this?" he asked, nodding to the jam jars drying on the shelf. "Gifts," I said. "Just something to remember me by." He gave me a strange look, then shrugged. "Well, don't wear yourself out." And just like that, he walked away. He didn't ask if I needed help, didn't ask if I wanted to come inside. He was used to seeing me as quiet. He didn't know quiet people can still plot. I went to bed early that night. My heart beat a little faster than usual, but not from fear. It was anticipation. Change had already begun. It was crawling under the floorboards, nesting in the documents, moving through the system, like the slow creep of morning light before a storm breaks. The next few weeks would be the test, the unraveling. But for now I had jam. If you had only one small act to do before reclaiming your entire life, would you hesitate? Would you give them one last chance? Or would you tie the twine, lick the envelope, and send the final warning with a sweet, berry-scented smile, the will they never knew about? It started with a conversation I barely remembered. One of those just in case, Talks married people have after dinner dishes are done, and the house is quiet. Arthur had just come home from the doctor that day. His cholesterol was high. Nothing dramatic, but he looked at me and said, "If something ever happens to me, promise you'll be smarter than I was about the paperwork." I thought he was being dramatic. I made fun of him at the time. But the next week, we sat down with our lawyer. That was nearly 15 years ago. We didn't have much, just the house, some savings, and what Arthur liked to call our rescue account, an emergency trust created in my name, only with strict instructions and layered protections. We funded it slowly, quietly, sometimes only $50 a month, but we kept it alive. Arthur wanted to make sure I was never at the mercy of anyone, not the government, not strangers, and certainly not our son. "He's a good boy," I'd said then. "He's a boy," Arthur replied. "Good changes when life does." I hated him for saying it, but now I bless him for preparing us. After Arthur passed, I kept that folder, tucked away in the back of my closet behind a faded coat I never wore. Inside it, a fully funded trust in my name, a deed to the house signed but not filed, held in trust until I decided otherwise. A secondary property small, but mine, in my sister's town. A power of attorney I had the right to revoke at any time. The same lawyer was still practicing. I'd sent him that second letter a few days before. Now I waited. I didn't tell my son what was coming. He didn't even know I had an original deed to the house. That was the beauty of long marriages and quiet women. We know where the real power sits. In a drawer, in a signature, in what we don't say out loud. A week later, I got a call from the lawyer's assistant. Friendly, formal. She confirmed the trust had been updated. My son's name had been officially removed from access. The home transfer papers were underway. The old joint account had been split, and the theft documented. "It's all being handled, Irene," she said. "We're on your side." And just like that, a slow tide began to rise under the house my son thought he owned. He had no idea his comfort was built on sand, and I was the one holding the tide chart. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was worried, because I wasn't. I lay in bed and thought about all the women like me, the ones sitting quietly in guest rooms or sheds, the ones who handed over their bodies, their time, their youth, and asked for nothing in return. But silence is not consent, and endurance is not permission. I rolled over and whispered to the dark, "Thank you, Arthur." Then I smiled, because by the time my son realized what I had done, it would already be too late. If you had been given the gift of one final hidden lifeline, something your husband left behind in faith that you'd one day need it, would you use it now? Or would you stay quiet, out of loyalty to someone who no longer sees you as family? "I need you, out by Friday." He said it like he was giving me a courtesy, like I should be grateful, like the eviction of a mother could be softened by a deadline. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I had just come back from the doctor's office with Marissa, the home nurse. Blood pressure still high, knees still swollen, the usual. I walked slowly to the shed, expecting silence. But he was waiting at the door, arms folded. "We found a spot for you," he said flatly. "A spot?" I asked. "An elder care facility. It's decent, state-supported. They have transportation and nurses. And look, it's better than this," he said, waving vaguely at the place he had stuffed me into like an unused appliance. I stared at him. His face gave nothing. No guilt, no warmth, just management. "We need the space, Mom. We've got renovations coming, and it's not fair to my wife or the kid." He said it like I was a shelf he'd grown tired of dusting. "You need to be out by Friday." Just like that. Not, "Are you okay with this?" Not, "Is there anything you need?" Just be out. I nodded slowly. My hands were shaking again, but not from weakness this time. No, something else was rising now. A slow, thick calm, like a mother's patience, hardened into steel. He mistook my silence for surrender. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he added, already turning away. I didn't. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue. Instead, I waited until he was inside, then walked over to the shed, sat down at the little table beside the cot, and picked up the flip phone. I called the lawyer. "It's time," I said. "Initiate the transfer. All of it." He didn't need more. We'd prepared for this. The house deed, the trust access, the alternate residence, everything had been drafted, reviewed, and approved. All that remained was the final authorization. "You'll get the confirmation by end of day," he told me. And then he added something that caught in my throat. "You've done the right thing, Irene. You're taking back your life." That night, I boiled water for tea and packed the few things I cared about. My husband's watch, the old notebook where I'd written everything down, the jar of jam I'd saved just for myself. I didn't tell my son I was leaving. He wouldn't notice anyway. Not until the locks changed. That Friday morning, he came to the shed with a clipboard and a box of my medications. He knocked, but I was already gone. If the person who raised you turned around one day and asked you to leave like a tenant late on rent, would you leave quietly, or would you let them discover what it feels like when the house they thought they owned no longer belongs to them? The locks were changed overnight. The locksmith came early, a young man in a Navy uniform with kind eyes and no questions. He nodded politely when I showed him the folded paper proof of property ownership deed now transferred. My name sat cleanly at the top. No co-owners, no complications. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just gotta work. By 9:17 a.m., the house my son thought he controlled had new locks, new keys, and a new reality. The quiet suburban street barely noticed. A lawnmower buzzed a few houses down. Birds chirped like nothing monumental was happening. But to me, it was the sound of a final page turning. I watched from the front porch as the locksmith handed me a fresh set of keys. His fingers brushed mine, and for a brief second, I felt something unfamiliar power. Not the kind that shouts or flexes, but the quiet, irreversible kind. "You're all set," he said. "No one can get in without your permission now. No one can get in." The weight of that sentence settled in my chest like an anchor made of freedom. When I stepped back inside the house, it felt different. It wasn't just cleaner. It wasn't just brighter. It was mine again. The air was still. The fridge hummed quietly. The old family photo on the hallway wall, our son grinning between Arthur and me, suddenly felt like a painting of a stranger. I walked into the kitchen, brewed tea, and sat at the very table where they used to whisper about me when they thought I couldn't hear. Now I sat tall, alone, but unbroken. At 11:04 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it. My son stood there, confused, his key in hand. He tried the lock before ringing. I had watched him twist it twice, frown, then press the bell. "Mom," he said, "what's going on?" I said nothing, just held up the legal folder and tapped the label. He looked down, his brow furrowed. Then his face twisted, first in confusion, then in disbelief, and finally in anger. "You can't just," he started. I said, voice even. And I did. "You took everything." "No," I replied. "I reclaimed what was already mine." He stepped back, looked around the porch like it would offer him a way back in. "I have rights," he mumbled. "Not here you don't," I said. He stared at me, eyes hard. But behind them, I saw it panic, the realization that this wasn't a bluff, that I wasn't the ghost in the shed anymore. I was the storm. He opened his mouth to speak again, then closed it. For a moment, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered the lock on the fridge, the shed, the laughter over my money. So I closed the door, not angrily, not cruelly, just firmly. On the other side, I heard nothing. No begging, no apologies, just silence. He didn't ring again. Later that evening, the lawyer called to confirm the account. Freezes had processed. His access gone. His attempts to dispute denied. And the house officially under my name. He had no legal ground left. I slept in the main bedroom that night. The mattress was familiar, the sheets freshly laundered, the window cracked to let in the scent of grass and justice. If the child you raised with love one day returned, to find you had removed them from your life completely, legally, finally, would you feel guilt? Or would you finally sleep through the night for the first time in years? His credit cards began to decline. It started with a phone call. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but his voice was loud, frantic, angry. It carried across the yard from the sidewalk as I watered the potted plants by the porch. "What do you mean declined?" he shouted into the phone. "I've had this card for 6 years. A pause. Then more shouting. No, I didn't authorize any changes. No, I don't need a replacement. I need access." He was pacing now, running his hand through his hair the same way he used to when he couldn't figure out his algebra homework. He hung up and stood still for a long time, staring down at the ground, like it might hold the answer. Then he looked up, saw me. I didn't speak. I just kept watering my flowers. Slowly, gently. He didn't come up the steps. Not yet. He knew better. But by the end of that week, the cracks had turned into canyons. He called again 2 days later. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said. "You are," I replied. "No, I mean in person." No, I hung up. That same day, my lawyer called with a quiet update. The joint bank account closed. My name pulled. My Social Security redirected into the private trust. His auto payments all bouncing now. The mortgage on their second home frozen under legal review. Because here's what he didn't realize. When he moved me into that shed, his wife had convinced him to consolidate, to simplify. They had tied too many things together. Car loans, property, even utilities, all under one umbrella with my name as the quiet co-signer. He thought my name was a footnote. He forgot that a footnote can carry the whole foundation. Now it was gone. He came back the next morning earlier this time. Less shouting, more pleading. "I just need to talk to you," he said through the door. "You don't understand. Things are tight. I've got bills. We didn't mean for it to get this far." I stood on the other side, fingers pressed against the cool wood. "You meant for me to disappear," I said. "And now you're the one vanishing." No answer, just silence. That evening, I sat on the porch again, a glass of sweet tea in my hand, the jam jars catching the last of the sunlight on the sill beside me. I watched as a tow truck rolled slowly down the street, stopped at the curb, lifted his SUV like it weighed nothing. He stood on the lawn, arms limp at his sides, mouth open. I watched, and I didn't blink. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook again. Not in anger, just in truth. He learned to survive by using me. He'll learn to survive without me, too. I wasn't cruel. I didn't take anything he earned. I simply removed what was never his to claim. And now he stood on shaking ground, staring at the pieces of the life he built on my back. If the person who stole your dignity, your income, and your space finally found themselves on the other end begging for help, not because they loved you, but because they needed your access, would you offer a hand, or would you let them learn what it feels like to be unwanted, unneeded, and unseen? when he knocked on my door. It was raining. Not the kind of rain that comes down in sheets, but the soft kind. The kind that taps the roof and makes everything quiet. The kind that makes you remember things you thought you'd buried. I was reading in the armchair by the front window, one of Arthur's old books, the spine worn thin from his thumb. I hadn't touched it in years. Now it felt like company. Then came the knock. Not rushed, not angry, just tentative. I didn't need to look. I knew. Still, I stood and pulled the curtain aside. There he was, my son. No umbrella, hair-soaked shirt clinging to his back hands, shoved deep into his pockets, like he was trying to disappear into himself. He looked smaller, thinner. The man who once stood over me with a clipboard telling me to be out by Friday now looked like a boy again. I didn't open the door. He saw me through the glass, lifted a hand, then lowered it. "Please," he said. I couldn't hear him, but I read his lips. He stepped forward, his face close now. "I need help, Mom." My hand hovered over the doorknob, not out of temptation, out of memory. My fingers still remembered tying his shoes, wiping his tears, carrying him when he was sick. And now here he was soaked to the bone, asking for mercy. But mercy without accountability is just another invitation to be used. I mouthed back 2 words, "Not now." His shoulders fell. He stepped back, then sat on the edge of the porch like a man with nowhere else to go. I watched him for a while, watched the rain soak through the knees of his jeans, watched him put his head in his hands, and I did nothing. I made myself tea. I sat back down. Because here's the truth. Forgiveness doesn't always look like open doors. Sometimes it looks like silence, boundaries, a refusal to re-enter a burning house just because someone else now feels the heat. He stayed out there for nearly an hour, then left. Did I feel cruel? Yes. Did I feel relief? Also yes. That night, I replayed the image over and over, his figure, small and still framed in the rain. And I didn't cry. I wrote one more line in my notebook. He finally knows what it feels like to knock and be unheard. If the child you gave your life to finally stood in front of you, broken but still not sorry, would you let them in, or would you keep the door closed until the apology came from their soul instead of their survival instinct? The voicemail I saved. It came 3 days after the knock. I wasn't expecting it. I'd stopped expecting anything from him by then. The voicemail alert blinked on the old landline I kept in the kitchen. A habit. I liked the sound of it, like something from a world before text messages replaced real feelings. I pressed play. The message began with static. A breath. Then his voice, low and ragged. "Mom." Just that. One word, stretched thin. Then a pause. I was wrong. Longer pause. I could hear traffic in the background. Horns. Maybe a siren. He was outside somewhere. Not home. Not sheltered. I was wrong about all of it. About you. About everything I said. I leaned against the counter. You didn't deserve any of that. The shed. The way we talked to you. The money. God, the money. He sounded like he was trying not to cry, but failing. I know I took advantage. I know I treated you like you were in the way. But I wasn't strong enough to admit that I needed you. That I still do. Another breath. I'm on someone's couch now. I've got an interview tomorrow. I'm trying to fix things. I don't even know what that means anymore. But I'm trying. I swear. Then the part that caught in my chest like a needle. I miss you. Not just your help. You. I miss hearing your voice. I miss the way the house used to smell like jam and coffee. I miss the woman who used to cheer for me, even when I didn't deserve it. Silence again. I don't expect anything. But if you ever want to call, even just once, I'd pick up on the first ring. Beep. End of message. I stood there for a long time, not crying, just listening again in my mind. It wasn't a full apology. Not yet. But it was the first real sentence he'd said to me in years that sounded like it came from his heart instead of his ego. I didn't delete it. I saved it, played it again that night, and again the next morning. I never called back, not because I was cruel, but because I needed time, and because healing isn't about running back to the person who hurt you just because they finally noticed the bruise. It's about sitting with your own silence long enough to know the difference between love and guilt. Still, I kept the voicemail, because one day, if he ever becomes the man he was meant to be, I'll want him to hear how far he came. And if he doesn't, I'll still have that moment. That one moment when the boy I raised remembered who he was. If someone finally says the words you've been waiting to hear, but too late, and after too much, do you reach for them again? Or do you hold the words, like a seashell, to your ear and remember that you once mattered, even if only for a minute? A cup of tea, a quiet sunrise. The kettle whistles softly. It's early. The sky hasn't decided what color it wants to be, yet still that hush of blue-gray just before the sun remembers to rise. I open the kitchen window to let in the breeze. It carries the scent of wet leaves, morning grass, and something that feels like clean slate. I make my tea the same way. I always have a splash of milk, a spoon of honey I buy from the farmer's market. No one's watching me now. No one counting what I take or questioning what I need. The house is quiet, but not in the way that hurts anymore. I sit at the dining table, the one where I was once scolded for dropping a fork, and look out at the backyard. The trees rustle gently. The world feels distant, but I am here fully present in my skin. This house no longer echoes with shame. It listens. It waits. It holds me. I've kept things simple. Clean linens, curtains I chose myself. The guest room is now my reading room. The shed is empty, locked, and covered in vines I planted last month. No one else will live in there again. Not while I'm alive. Every so often I hear whispers from neighbors. They don't know the full story. They never do. But they look at me differently now. Some nod politely. Some linger too long, hoping I'll explain. I never do, because strength doesn't always need an audience. I keep a notebook on the table now. Not the one filled with hurt, but a new one. Blank pages. Space to breathe. Sometimes I write down simple things. The tea was perfect today. The porch light caught the roses just right. I didn't think about the shed once. I no longer keep score. I keep peace. And yet every now and then I press play on the voicemail. Not to reopen wounds, but to remind myself of what I survived. There's power in remembering. I don't know if my son will ever change. I don't know if I'll ever trust him again. But I do know this. I will never again let someone mistake my silence for weakness. And if that's all I have left to teach him, so be it. If you were me, watching the sunrise, through clean windows, sipping tea from your favorite cup, knowing the storm has passed, but the air still carries its scent, would you let him back in? Or would you close your eyes, breathe in the stillness, and finally, let it all go? The sun is up now. Light spills across the kitchen floor, touching everything gently, like it knows what this house has endured. I sit quietly with my tea, 2 hands around the mug, letting the warmth bleed into my fingers. There's no dramatic music, no applause, no fireworks for the battles I've survived. But I don't need them, because peace isn't loud. It's the sound of the clock ticking without dread. The hum of the refrigerator that no longer hides shame. The breath I take every morning that doesn't feel borrowed. Sometimes I wonder what people would think if they heard this whole story. Would they say I was too harsh, too cold? Would they understand how long I stayed silent before I acted? Would they forgive me for choosing myself at long last? And sometimes I wonder if my son ever truly understands what he did. Would he forgive himself? I hope he does. Not for me, for him. Because regret is a heavy thing to carry, and I've already laid mine down. There's still life to be lived, still jam to make, still books to read, still autumn mornings to watch unfold through this kitchen window. I don't need revenge anymore. I need softness, stillness, a life that fits me, not one I have to shrink to survive in. And maybe that's the greatest justice of all, not what I took from him, but what I finally gave to myself. So here I sit, a woman who was cast out and came back home, a mother who was dismissed but never destroyed. If you were me, what would you do in this situation?